Chef here with Dia Beltran, our editor extraordinaire. She's some fetching new gear. She's a little prettier than me, but only by a little bit. Episode 2, it's here. We're here, we're kicking off. Game on. We've been advertising, we've been promoting it, we've been fucking working our little backsides off, trying to get this organised. And on our guest list, we've got our usuals from last year. Everyone's back.
Yes, Stephan Wells, our little expert on climate change, and Stephan Livera, our little expert on Bitcoin.
Why are you calling them little? These guys are epic.
Our epic experts, I'm sorry.
Our epic experts. I can't, one thing, one job.
I like
and the
it.
Freedom Puppies chomping at the bit to get in. But hey guys, we've got, yes, Stephan Livera, we've got Stephan Wells, both experts in their field, or certainly superstars in their field.
Father Chris Yates.
Father Chris Yates.
Little expert on
A little expert, you love this little expert thing.
Bitch.
I find that hard to believe.
The new faces.
Series 2, Episode 1, New Faces. Alright,
Larry Sharpe.
Larry Sharpe, do you know who Larry Sharpe is?
I know he's biracial and good looking.
Okay, that's definitely all we need in a guest. Are you biracial and good looking, or bisexual and good looking?
I'm biracial and good looking.
You know, it's said that all women are bisexual. They're like spaghetti.
I've had an attraction to women in the past.
Well, you know, they're like spaghetti. They're you know, straight to wet.
Ew.
How romantic. Are we allowed to make inappropriate jokes like that?
Probably.
I'm gonna do that all serious, because I find things like that funny, and hopefully other people find it a little bit funny, and if not, well, too bad, it's my show.
Exactly.
Make your own damn show and make your own shit jokes. Look, Larry Sharpe he ran for governor in New York.
Yes,
in
and you were telling
2018.
me about a video that you loved that you thought was genius that he made.
Yeah, he because he's a Libertarian candidate, the major news media wouldn't give him much of a platform to run with. So what Larry did was he actually took an episode of the debates between the Republican Democrat candidate for his election, and then he actually sat there in between and he debated them without them sort of knowing about it as a broken up video. It's really cool, it's really fun. The guy is brilliant and we're really, really thrilled to have him. So he's going to be making an appearance on the program over the next few weeks, which is great. Thank you so much. Topher Field, surely you've heard of Topher?
I've heard of Topher Field, yes, I have.
Thank goodness. You know he's not a Kardashian, right?
Yes.
Just checking.
He knows all about the Murray Darling. He's an expert on, I suppose, water.
Murray Darling Basin problem and also the COVID lockdown stuff. He's been down there protesting pretty hard during that. But yeah, Topher Field is an amazing Libertarian guy, very switched on, and he's really kicking goals down there in Victoria. And to his credit, he's very principled, and I think that's hugely important in the guests we get. The other two guys that will be making their debuts in Series 1, or Episode 1.
Adam Kokesh.
Adam Kokesh is one, and Garry Stewart's the other. Now, Garry Stewart, he just messaged me the other day saying, am I really going to be on this program? Because we did the interview a little while back. Garry Stewart is the actual, he's the president of the Society of William Wallace. So anybody who's
You
ever
probably
watched...
won't understand him, though.
Yeah, he does have a really thick Scottish accent. So you've got to play into the Scottish accent. But anybody who's watched the movie Braveheart with Mel Gibson in it, this is the guy who's currently charged with protecting the actual historical figure. So he's the president of the William Wallace Society. They're really dedicated to preserving and protecting the memory of William Wallace and everything that happened in and around that historical event. And since we couldn't get William Wallace himself and his catch cry is freedom, we thought, well, let's do the next best thing and talk to Garry. So Gary's really great. He does have a hugely thick Scottish accent, but apparently I've got a thick Aussie bogan accent. So
I often don't understand you.
I never understand you, but that's all right.
I'm bilingual.
And as you mentioned, our other big name American guest is Adam Kokesh. Adam runs a program known as Adam versus the Man, big time libertarian rebel in the US. He also ran for president, but he called it I'm running for non-president. His entire platform was the peaceful dissolution of the federal government, which the guy's really switched on. He's really sharp. He was also an Iraq war veteran.
Yeah.
He saw combat.
Yeah.
And, you know, the guy's been through a lot. He stood for a lot, and he considers himself an activist. We're really excited to have these guys being willing to sit down and come on with us. Oh, but not even just a big name. It's not just about the big name.
No, I know. But Adam Kokesh is a big name. Garry Stewart is just an interesting, amazing guest.
An interesting, amazing guest. Yeah. So it's just about being able to have these really cool people. And, yeah, Adam's got a lot of runs on the board. There's no doubt about that. He's achieved a lot in career as an activist and only bloke I've ever seen, or only bloke I'd ever noticed being arrested for dancing in public.
Funny.
I fucking didn't think that was a thing. It's a thing, and you can YouTube the shit out of it and watch Adam Kokesh get arrested for dancing at the Jefferson Memorial in the United States, which further backs up my argument that police all around the world are overreaching bastards who need to sort their lives out, and governments need to mind their damn business. You can be arrested for dancing. Yeah, that's pretty well.
Was he dancing naked, or was it just dancing?
No, he was overdressed, he reckons. But when I discussed it with him, he did say that it was very, very loosely that you would be able to consider what he was doing dancing. He sort of, I mean, white guys can't dance is apparently the thing, you know.
White men can't jump, yeah.
It is what it is. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm presuming Dee is going to cut and edit this little intro fairly well. This will probably be the hardest job for the entire first season. Welcome back. Welcome aboard. If you've never seen us again, check out all the specials. There's going to be a whole trove of more stuff coming out. Content City.
Buy our merch.
Oh, yeah. Jump on. T-shirts and hats are $20, $25 each.
Buy our marijuana.
There's cannabis products and oils and all that sort of stuff happening as well.
We'll hook you up.
Oh, for sure. Check out the ads. Check out the links. Hit us up publicly, privately. We don't really care. Go nuts. And let's kick off Resolute TV, Episode 1, Series 2. Thanks, guys. Righto, guys, Series 2, Episode 1. We've got the amazing Larry Sharpe, who's all the way from New York in the United States. So we've had some great United States guests. Larry ran as a contender for governor of New York against Andrew Cuomo in 2018.
I did not win.
He did not win. He did not win. And New York probably regrets that about now, I suspect. You've had a huge political career, really, in the scheme of things. You've got some amazing policies that I've been reading about. And you've agreed to come on this little program based out of Australia. So thank you very much for your time. It's thrilled to have you here. It's great to be able to talk to you and learn from you. Mate, how's New York at the moment? How is everything?
It's New York. What are you going to do? It's New York. It's my overlord, His Majesty Andrew Cuomo II, has decided that I cannot work now. So when all praise unto him. When he does eventually allow me to work again, I'll go back to work. So that would be great. Until then, I'm basically stuck in my basement.
Stuck in your basement? I'm joking. Won't let you in the main part of the house, or?
No, she's mad at me now. I can't work. What value do I have? Get out.
Yeah. Get out, down into that basement. There
Absolutely.
We go.
That's it. Yes.
Mate, look, it's the COVID stuff's crazy.
I'm joking, but I'm not. Meaning, I'm joking in that I'm not actually banished to the basement. But imagine how many couples, how many relationships are being stressed because of this, right? Stressed because of you have a relationship where you and your spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever the case may be, you spend time apart in other worlds that you usually do, and now you can't. So now the one spouse doesn't get the outlet that he or she needs, and now they're also stuck with someone who they're not usually stuck with all that time anymore. Imagine how that works. It's going to affect relationships. Or the reverse. How about someone who's supposed to be going out there making money, and that was part of the deal that you had, an implicit deal you had in your relationship, right? One of the reasons why people get together is not just because of love. It is, but also because of shared resources. It's what people do. And now all of a sudden, one or both isn't pulling their weight anymore. And it isn't their fault. They can't go to work. So they can't go and pull their weight anymore. I mean, that's got to stress a relationship, right? And so the amount of damage that is going to be done emotionally, socially, to our countries and to my cities in particular, because of these lockdowns, we don't see the damage yet. We're going to see the damage the massive amounts of damage that's going to be going on in the next 6 months to 2 years.
Mate, it's a crazy time. I'm not sure what the levels of lockdown you guys are in. Victorians, which is one of our southern states, they're probably the most. We generally joke that it's a socialist state of Victoria, or the Socialist Republic. They're on what they've called stage 4 lockdown, so there's no leaving the house for exercise or anything. You can go to the shops as long as the shop's within 5 kilometres. Masks are now mandatory, which, look, some people are ugly enough to require masks. I probably should wear one most of the time, but hey, that's life. Mate, what's the comparison with New York?
New York, same thing. The problem, though, is that, look, New York is a communist state already. It already was before this even happened, right? New York City, at least. The upstate, and I don't know if you know much, your viewers know much about New York State. New York State has New York City, which is about half its population of New York State. And the rest of the state is much smaller. We've got, give or take, 12 cities within the state, and none of them are past 500,000 people. New York City has 8.5 million just itself. Every other city doesn't even match 500,000. Some are under 250,000. So that means they're much smaller cities compared to New York, and the rest is rural. I mean, New York has farms and dairy farms and things of that sort. So it's a big difference in our state. We have a big diversity in our state. And because of that, as one city begins to try to control the entire state, by default, you have problems. We talk about opening up schools, right? New York City might have a school, or downstate might have a school that has 2,000, 3,000 kids in it, where upstate, there might be 40 in the entire school. It's a whole different way of looking at things. I mean, can you make a safe school with 3,000 kids? Probably not. Can you make a safe school with 40 kids? Maybe. Maybe you can, right? Maybe, I don't know, but the point is the centralization of control has been very difficult. And in New York City, we have the most massive part of the lockdown. And the thing that people don't realize is there's several parts that are bad here. The first one is New York City is literally a mecca for talent. About 1/3 of New York City residents are not born in the country, and another 1/3 aren't born in New York City. So most people in New York City aren't born in New York City, right? We normally in New York City say things like, "Where are you from?" And because we assume you're not from here. That's the assumption that we make. I'm one of the weird ones. I'm actually born here in Manhattan, but most of my brethren here, they aren't. My comrades are not. But in any case, why do I say that? Because now people want to leave. They want to go back to where they came from. The benefits that you got by being in New York City outweighed the oppression of the communist oppression, right? They outweighed it. But now when it doesn't, why would you be here? Right? The advantage of coming to New York City was you could show up in New York City, not knowing anybody, talented. You could start a business. You'd have financing. You might get a job that's a 6-figure job. I mean, things could pop up for you right away. The opportunity costs were there. You could get on Broadway if you were an actor. You can get into a movie if you were an actor. If you were a dancer. I mean, if you were into culture, you could actually get to be in the Met. There were so many opportunities for you in New York City. So of course you'd show up. Of course you'd roll the dice. Of course you'd put up with government oppression because the opportunity is amazing. Well, when that's gone, no, you won't. New York City and most cities are not going to recover to the same point they were. It's impossible. But there's a second piece here that people aren't really paying attention to. Just recently, our governor did. The wealthy are leaving. In my daily job, again, when I am given permission to work by my overlord, when I'm given permission to work, then I actually meet with many people who are wealthy. I'm a trainer and a coach. I'm a teacher. So many people I work with tend to be a bit more wealthy. Many of them have second homes. It's a common thing in New York City. I don't know if you have that in the large cities in Australia, but in New York City, we do. So you have a home in New York City, in Manhattan usually, because you work in Manhattan. And then you have a summer or winter home someplace else, either Jersey Shore, Florida, Long Island, Connecticut, someplace other than New York City. Well, when COVID hit and our overlord locked us all down, the wealthy said, I'm not going to sit here in my small apartment. I'm going to go to my cool summer home or my cool winter home, which is a much cooler home, right? So they all left the city. They packed up and left, right? So when they left, they started doing work like this through either Skype or Zoom or whatever. And they found out they could actually make money and survive and run their businesses without having to be in Manhattan. Why go to Manhattan? And the problem is, in a communist state like New York City, there's so many wealthy that the people who are making money are those who serve the wealthy in some way.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
when the wealthy leave, those who serve the wealthy don't have to be in Manhattan either. And then those who serve them don't have to be in Manhattan at all. And then those who serve them don't have to be in Manhattan at all. So why would you? Now, of course,
there's an entire food chain breaking down, obviously. Yeah,
you got it. And that's all a self-inflicted government wound. It is a self-inflicted wound. And we crushed our state. And my state, New York, prior to COVID, had a $6 billion deficit. Now we'll have about a $60 billion deficit. And we already had, before COVID, we had a $400 billion debt. Yes, that's one state.
Do they owe me the money? Is the money coming to me eventually from New York State? Is that who they owe?
I don't know exactly whoever. Most of what we owe is some form of entitlement, either bonds or things like that. And the sad part is New York has been so bad for so many years. Our governor has been horrible for so long that literally over 1 million New Yorkers have left the state in the past 10 years. Now to be about 2 million coming up here soon, have left the state. So bad that we're having a census in America this year. Every 10 years we have a census. And that's how you decide, how many Congress people we have. New York State is going to lose 2 of them next year. That's how bad we're going to lose 2. Losing them because of the population. So we're going to lose 2 of them. So people are leaving. But you might say, well, Larry, that's bad, but it's worse. A lot of those people are leaving the state after they retire. So they retire from a state job and they leave. So they get a pension from New York State being paid by New York's taxpayers, but they don't live in New York State anymore. So now New York State taxpayers are literally paying Florida. Here's money, Florida. It was so bad the Florida governor once said, thank you, New York, for all the money you give us.
That's unbelievable. That's embarrassing. It's amazing. I mean, from my little view here in Australia, we look at New York. Obviously, we see all the TV shows. We see all the, New York, what an amazing place. Anyone who's politically inclined knows that it's a bit socialist and a bit progressive. But you also look at it and you see it, and there's a level of awe, or
it's an amazing city to visit. I mean, Chef, please come and visit my city. It's an amazing city to visit. I mean, once the overlords allow us to walk around again. When they give us permission, please come. We have something that's amazing about New York. Let me pump my city for a couple of seconds only. We're one of the oldest cities on the continent. We're not the oldest, but we're one of the oldest cities in the continent. So you can find old history in our city that you can't find in most of the Western cities, because the Western cities in America were all built in the 1800s and 1900s. We were built in the 1600s. So we actually have history in our city. Not just that, we were the capital of America for a short time. So we have that too. We have Broadway. We have the Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, the UN. So we're an amazing tourist city. So please come visit. You probably don't want to live here, but please come visit.
Well, that depends. Are you going to have, if we're going to move there to live there, are you going to have another run at governor, and maybe we can improve things?
Well, my hope is, right, the question is, are New Yorkers so broken that they just don't know any better and will just continue to live under the overlords, right? Have we become the serfs of Tsarist Russia? Have we become that, right? I mean, if we have, then there's no hope. If we haven't, then I hope so. And the other worry is so many New Yorkers who would vote against His Majesty are physically leaving.
Yeah.
So the people who would vote for me are now in North Carolina or Florida or Tennessee. They're no longer here. So I don't know if we're in a spiral that can't be fixed, but I'm definitely going to try to fix it.
I share some of your concerns and sentiments for my fellow Australians watching the fallout from all of this. The people who are cheering publicly online. This is so great. It's about time we locked everybody down. Anybody who leaves the house under these conditions needs to be locked up forever. And I'm sitting there, and for me, that's shocking. I'm thinking, sometimes I can't help myself, and I'll have a little quip, and I'll say, oh, why don't we, anybody leaves the house, why don't we cut their hands off and their feet off so that they can't leave the house? That'd be a really good idea, and
that'll show up.
And and people actually will argue the point, going, well, if they're going to leave the house, maybe they should. It's like, are you people listening to yourselves? Like, I mean, I'm not a university graduate or anything like that. I'm a simple chef who reads a lot, studies a lot, thinks a lot, and I just, like, we've had cultures before. This is not the first time where a government has come in and bulldozed an entire population. A bloke named Mao tried it in China. A bloke named Mussolini tried it in Italy. It was tried by a couple of fellas in Germany and Russia and the like. And somehow now, because it's an Australian government or an American government, we're free countries, people don't see the comparison. Yeah, it's like, they just don't seem to see the comparison. And
well, I'm trying to but this is the thing that I will bring up often. If you look back at, let me do two different things. One, the virus, and one, what you just said. If you were in Germany in, say, I don't know, 1910, I'm making that 1910, and you were to say, hey, Germans, in about 30 years or so, you're going to be rounding up all of your Jewish population and systematically murdering them. German people would have said, what, are you stupid? This is Germany. We would never do that. That's dumb. What? Oh, come on. But not just that. The French would have said the same thing. The Germans would never do that. They love their Jewish population. That would never happen. Come on, they got guys like Einstein. Stop. That's never, you're an idiot. That's never going to happen, right? Russia, maybe. But they would have never thought that Germany was going to do that. They wouldn't have. And yet 35 years later, that was actually happening. So I think this is common that most people think them, not us, right? We would never do. That's those people. They do that, not us. But looking internally is critically important. But I want to go to one more important piece that you're kind of talking about here, which is this is a crisis. This isn't the last virus that we're ever going to see, right? There's going to be another virus. So is now our answer every time there's a virus, shut everything down, destroy the economy? If that's true, if that becomes our norm, right? If that becomes our norm, why would any enemy of any of our countries ever build a nuclear bomb? That's dangerous, it's expensive, we'll get caught. That's stupid. Why would we do that? Let's make some biological weapon then. We'll give ourselves most of our people the vaccine, whatever the case may be. And then we'll release this, and then America will shut itself down every 2 years, and they'll bankrupt themselves. We win, right? I mean, they would beat us through our own destroying ourselves. I was a U.S. Marine for 7 years. And when I was a Marine, I was taught that, and I was a Marine years ago in the 80s. I was a Marine when we still had a Soviet Union, right? So I was taught that when there is a contaminated battlefield, you still have to fight. The war doesn't end because it's a contaminated battlefield. You find protocols to survive within that environment, and you still fight the battle because you've got to win either way. The war doesn't end because of this, right? And we were worried about chemical warfare, biological warfare, nuclear warfare, and you still go through. And my argument for any nation, for any city, for any state is you have to find protocols to move your culture forward, regardless of how contaminated the environment is. It doesn't mean it's not black and white. It's not nobody does anything, but you find protocols. And the problem is we've assumed, even though it's never been true, but we've assumed that the only way to make this work, in fact, the best way to make this work, is centralized control. And that's absolutely not true. The best way to make this work is by simply making the central area a hub for information. If I was the governor of New York State or the president of the United States, whatever executive I would be, as soon as that virus crossed the border, whatever border it crossed, I'd be like, aha, it's a problem. It's a problem. The first thing I do is I say, obviously, government can't control this, clearly. So how about this instead? Localize people. First thing, and do you mind if I go down this road real fast? I'm going to give you some details.
Yeah, for sure.
The first thing I do as New York governor is I immediately rescind all distilling laws. Why? I want people to be able to make hand sanitizer. So I immediately I end all distilling laws immediately, rescind it totally. Anyone can make it. In fact, if you are a nonprofit or a community group, you may sell hand sanitizer, no sales tax. This way you don't have to apply for anything. You can just begin to sell, right? Now, when I do that, most people wouldn't do anything because it was early on. but some would have, and some nonprofits, local churches, local community groups would have decided, hey, let's try to make some money here. The government's going to make some money. They would have done that. They would have started to make hand sanitizer and do it. What happens? The culture begins to change and think about hand sanitizers. That's the beginning. Culture begins to shift. I then say, if you want to make masks, go ahead. You can make any masks you want to. And for any sales of masks in New York State, no sales tax. Yet again, now even larger companies go, ooh, I could make some cool New York Yankee ones and people would buy it and blah, blah, blah. And people would start, right? Initially, not much, but people would begin to do this. I would have started this in February. And I said this publicly. I'm on record saying this. I'm not doing a Monday morning quarterback thing where I'm telling you what would have done. I said this in February, right? So now that begins to happen. Why? If you look at many East Asian cultures, they already wear masks because they already had SARS and they had bird flu. It's part of their culture. If you see our Chinatown here in New York, I'm sure you have Chinatowns in Australia. Our Chinatowns in New York, people very often will be wearing masks even before COVID because it's part of their culture. When they're sick, they do it. It's natural for them, right? I would begin to change our culture, but I'm still not done. Then what do I say is I say anyone who wants to use 3D printing to create either a ventilator, to create a test, or anything else that we need like that, go ahead. We're not going to prosecute regardless of intellectual property laws. No prosecution. But what would have happened? People would have started making tests and such. But now what do I use my centralized hub for, my government for? To be a centralized repository for all information, not just CDC, FDA information. Because when you monopolize information, you by default create conspiracy theorists. That's what you do. People go, well, it might not be that, it might be this. I'm saying anybody would put it under in a very specific, easy way to understand. Put your info out. Here's what the government thinks. Here's what private organizations think. Here's what doctor associations think. And now there's no conspiracy theory because it's all transparent. Now, will there be some crazy people thinking it's aliens who did it? Of course. But that's going to be a tiny amount because I'm going to be transparent. Here's it all. Pick the things that work right for you. Then I'm going to ask, not force. I'm going to say, look, schools, businesses, retailers, jobs, here is what are the protocols right now that we think is right to keep our community safe. Please start adapting them now. Then I take my health inspectors, and instead of punishing people for not leaving or whatever I punish, I do the opposite. If you follow the government-related protocols, you get a stamp on your retail outlet. You followed our protocols, you get a stamp, a government stamp. You don't want to follow the protocols? No worries, no stamp for you. But I don't force it. No stamp. Yep. Not just that I encourage.
The people who are worried about it will naturally gravitate to those stores.
That's correct.
And the people will have more faith in the, and obviously, you know, I reached out because we have a lot of similar belief systems, I think. And you know, I question every government thing that I can find because I don't trust them. I have a great distrust for the government because, oh, well, the government says this is the go. Well, hang on a minute. Who's benefiting from this? Who's not benefiting from this? Where's the transparency? And yes. I mean, we don't. You guys seem to have an awful lot of cult-like worship of some certain political leaders.
Oh my God, yes.
Whereas here we tend to hate them all year round, right up until we're scared or it's election time or we want to have an argument. If you were to go into any Australian home on any day of the week or sit in any pub or restaurant and the topic of politics comes up or on a TV screen, doesn't matter whether well, for us, our Conservative Party is called the Liberal Party, and our Progressive Party is called the Labor Party. But, you know, whichever way you lean, all you hear people talk about is, oh, lying bastards, they're all mongrels, they're all assholes, they're all, you know, they're no good, they're, you know, but come push to shove, they still sort of support one of the two big parties. Yep. I sort of in my head think Australia should almost be right for more libertarian ideas. They like to think they are right up until they have to actually press the button. Whereas you guys have a real cult-like worship of your, you know, I'm a Democrat and you know, I'm a Republican, and you sort of, I'm in awe of just the amazing level of dedication the Americans have to their political leaders. I think it's
Well, you
It's
got to
amazing.
remember a couple of things here. The first one is, as I was saying, I wouldn't just have a government stamp. I'd also allow local organizations to also have their own stamps. To your point, I don't want you to only think that my stamp is the one that matters. I want you to be able to decide, well, this has 3 stamps, this has no stamps. Oh, no, I trust these guys. They've got my stamp. And now what happens naturally is all of a sudden now people start going, I don't have to close any businesses. Businesses will close because people won't go there. The consumer will decide what businesses close and what businesses open. And as people start getting sick, that will come out with social media. If people start going to these stores and going, oh, my mom got sick, my cousin got sick, for those stores don't work. Those protocols don't work. Get rid of them, right? Stop them clearly. And I don't have to physically do that. The culture will naturally do it on its own. Not just that people start wearing masks, washing their hands, caring about those things on their own without me having to tell them. It will shift on its own. But the most important piece is we're setting ourselves up for this one and for any other one that happens next. And here's the best part. People don't get destroyed. People don't get thrown in their homes. My entire idea for the damage that was done was to make a shift. And the shift was, instead of having a bailout of different organizations or groups or writing checks for people, you simply create a rule. If we're going to do executive orders, and that's all we do because we love, as you said, we love our cult-like leaders. We just love it. We just can't wait to be cult members in America. So we jump onto the cult as soon as we can. If we're going to do that, then do it to where you help the average person stay in place. What do I mean by that? We're doing things like rent freezes for 3 months or things like that. And here's money to this guy. It's a simple rule. As an executive order, you say, if you are a financial institution in the United States in any way, shape, or form, you may not enforce any payments of any type of debt for 6 months. No enforcement of that for 6 months. Period. That's step one. Now, people say we're going crazy, but just hear me out before you want to throw me off a bridge. Just hear me out. So once you do that, the second thing is you allow anyone who has rent to pay half rent regardless of contract. Now, if you're a landlord, you go, wait a minute, how am I going to sell on half rent? You don't have to pay your mortgage. So you can afford half rent, right? Half rent, you still need maintenance and things of that sort. So as a landlord, you have other expenses, but you can survive if you're not paying your mortgage. Why? Financial institution, no mortgages, no credit cards, no insurances. You're not paying any of them. So as a landlord, you can survive on half rent because you're not paying your other bills, right? You can survive on that. So they can pay half rent. You can survive. That's all I wanted you to do is survive for 6 months. That's all I want you to do, right? You do that. Now, not just that. If you're an employer, you may pay your employees half salary. No matter what your contract is, even minimum wage, you may pay half salary. Union, doesn't matter. Half salary. You can pay that if you want to. Why? I can't survive on half salary. If you're not paying your mortgage, if you're paying half rent, if you're not paying your credit card, yeah, you can. You can survive. Yeah, okay. Now, that's 6 months. Now you can say, well, who's getting hurt here? The banks are getting hammered in this one. But no worries. Sadly, we are going to bail our banks out anyway. That's how it works. I wish that wasn't true. I'm a libertarian. I don't like that fact. However, it is a fact. That's what's going to happen. So instead of me doing crony capitalism and giving money to certain people and picking winners and losers, I simply say society survive on half for 6 months. Banks, tell me how much you lost. We'll write you a check for half and we'll have the Fed make magic money for the other half. But at least everyone stays in place. You don't lose your home. You don't lose your house. You don't lose your job, but something else. You've got 6 months. So in 6 months, what are you going to be doing? Creating protocols to survive through this. If this was 6 months ago, that was February. Now it's August. You would literally have all the protocols right now, how to survive, move. Nobody gets fired. Nobody loses their home. Nobody gets evicted. None of this happens. We still write a massive check, but it's to one person with no bureaucracy and no picking of winners and losers. It's just the big banks only who were going to get bailed out anyway. But now we're prepared and we know what the protocols are. And there's not the social upheaval that I'm actually more worried about, because if we destroy our society, how can we ever repair our economy? If we can't repair our economy, how can we pay our debt? But if we keep our society, fix our economy, we could then pay the debt. It could actually work. That was my entire plan 6 months ago. And now what are we doing? New York State will be going through bankruptcy.
So for the first time, everybody, on Series 2, Episode 1, we get to chat with Father Chris Yates. I've missed our weekly catch-ups, mate.
Absolutely,
nice to have you
yeah.
back.
Great to be back. I've got,
smashing-looking T-shirt. You look fantastic. Far better than Manchester City jersey.
You know me. You know us Libertarians. We're all very corporate, and we like to wear uniforms. So
I own you now. You know that, right? Like
that's right.
I expect all your sermons to be about promoting.
That's right. So I'm wearing two uniforms today.
It looks fantastic. I mean, to be fair, look. No, I appreciate all your efforts, and I thought we'd better slide you a T-shirt, and why not? It's all good fun, and we do try to have a bit of a good time with this program. At the end of the day, that's Christ. There's enough misery out there. The least we can do is try and have the odd good time where we get a chance, mate. How have you been?
Yeah, pretty good. I mean, I think it's interesting you mentioned the word misery. I mean, I'm kind of coming out of it now. Partly because the weather's improving, because I'm here in Newcastle in New South Wales, and we've just had a bit of a sunny spate, which does lift the spirits, especially for someone who's from Manchester. I mean, weather has a profound effect on us. You've only got to watch Coronation Street to know that. So, but I think the reason I was kind of a bit low is the reason so many people are, is that COVID thing. And it's not just the sort of, the day-to-day restrictions that have been in our lives, because, I mean, here in New South Wales, we're incredibly fortunate when you look at our poor brothers and sisters in Victoria, for example. My uncle there, who's had to close his business twice, even though he lives in regional Victoria where there are no cases in his town, and the financial hit that comes with that. So I'm really not trying to play the victim. There are people who really have suffered greatly through this thing. But I think, the bombardment in the news and the necessary and understandable obsession. We all want information, but I think it's been quite depressing, really. Not just facing deaths and all those serious things, but just the sort of daily grind of that restriction. So I've tried to put this time to at least some good use. I mean, as you know, I'm not the sort of person to sit around and do nothing. And so I've been talking a lot with my colleague, Father David Batrick, who maybe we'll get him on the show sometime. He and I run our church together. And we've both really been thinking about how people have followed this shift from a sort of medieval worldview of God and the devil are in everything. And a sort of magical, enchanted view of the world. And then, of course, post-Reformation and post the Enlightenment, a very rationalist and scientific view. These two things are not opposed, by the way. The one came from the other. I'm always baffled by people that somehow think that religion and science are in opposition to one another. Science is from the Latin word scientia. I mean, it's of knowing. And it actually comes out of the ecclesiastical or the church philosophical tradition. But anyway, that's another argument. But everyone presupposed that we'd just become progressively more secular, and we wouldn't have any more need to call upon God or any other what people might consider fantastical things. But really, secularism reached its conclusion in the 20th century, because in the name of secularism, we had Stalinist Russia. We certainly had, Nazi ideology, although it drew on images from religious and certainly pre-Christian era, was very much a rationalist. You get eugenics, you get this idea of, that's a very sort of post-scientific view or a scientific view of the world, skewed with an evil ideology, but. Nevertheless, we all thought that, secularism would hold sway. But what we've seen, at least in the last 10 years, is a movement away from secularism. We're actually becoming more religious. And you see this in things like the number of dream catchers I see hanging from people's car mirrors. And to be fair, even many people who have rosaries hanging from their car mirrors might never have prayed the rosary in their lives. But we have this kind of, we're actually moving away from secularism. But, and I would lament because I'm biased, we're not moving back towards some semblance of a nice balance within the church, of a Christian philosophical understanding of the world, married with science and all of the wonderful things that we've received from scientific progress. We're actually seeing that this religious zeal is political. In other words, people's politics is now their religion, and the adherence to this and the zealousness with which they hold it, and the identity, and we have these kind of rituals. We've seen this most acutely locked in our houses, watching the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, and of course, people deliberately skewing the difference between the statement Black Lives Matter, which is, you'd have to be a very odd and evil person not to agree with that principle. That Black Lives Matter, of course, they do, just like all human life matters.
Everybody else's life matters, yes.
Yeah. And of course, the political, which we know is a neo-Marxist sort of anti-family, all of the tropes of leftism that are going on now. And we see the initiation practices, whether it's you have to put your hand in the air of certain things, or you have to take the knee. And this is literally, a very well recognizable religious practice, to take the knee. Christians take the knee in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, or when proposing to their wives, or certain religious shows, signs of obedience to Christ. So these things are directly out of traditional religion, but are entirely political, and therefore totally divisive. And have led to real violence and things that nobody could really defend from a human perspective. But the point is these are not secular people; these are religious people. But their religion is not Christianity; it's politics. And I got to. You'd have heard the news, because no one could avoid it, that Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. And God rest her soul. And rightly, many people said the undeniable truth, which is that she was an amazing human being who achieved a great deal in her life and was smart. I don't agree with her politics, but actually, an entire human being is more than just their politics, and so we should celebrate that people can have wonderful traits and be role models, even if we don't agree with them entirely. But the response, again, was a zealous religious response. Counterfactual in saying, presidents shouldn't nominate to replace when they're in election year. Every president so far in the history of the Republic has done so. The argument Republicans made last time was that, well, when you don't have the Senate, what's the point in nominating somebody? But of course, that's not the case this time around. But my attention was drawn to a real manifestation of what I'm talking about, which was there was a Reform synagogue I think it was in New York. I might be wrong about that, but I think it was in New York. And Reform Judaism is, Orthodox Jews would say it bears very little resemblance to Judaism as they understand it, as kind of doctrinally conservative Jews would. But in any case, at this Reform synagogue, there was a rabbi in a prayer shawl, and in the worship in the synagogue, they have a portion of the prophets chanted. Christians would know those prophets as the prophetic books of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, like the book of Isaiah, the book of Jeremiah, these ones. And for this service, and this was, I think, the evening or the following evening from when Ruth Bader Ginsburg had died, they substituted the words of the prophets with some words from something written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And now it's actually quite blasphemous for an Orthodox Jew. Now, I'm not the hysteria brigade. I'm not clutching my pearls and being horrified by this. But
some of my writings will go into their Bibles as we go along. And we can, you know, like, it's crazy when you word it like that, though, mate. Like,
yeah,
like and you know, I'm not a religious guy, but I respect your right to be religious, and I respect that you have a process and you have a. It's no different than Muslims who pray 5 times a day, and okay, that's you know, no problem. I can respect that. That's what you want to do and why you want to do it. I don't necessarily want to partake, but when you see that they're willing to go that far, let's just come in our own Bible and replace it with whatever nonsense some other humanist come out with.
And look, and I believe in their freedom of religion. If that's the religion they want to practice, they can do that. What I'm saying is that it is a rather telling sign that you know, that actually when pushed between a progressive political agenda and the religion of Judaism, the agenda wins out. So in other words, that's the primary religion. And all of the trapping, you know, the trappings of religion, a synagogue or a rabbi and vestments and what have you. Yes, they keep all of that, but they will literally replace the words of the prophets with the words of someone who's just died. And by the way, I would suggest Ruth Bader Ginsburg would certainly not approve of that happening. You know, I'm not. She was definitely not trying to make herself some kind of alternative god or prophet. But it's just, like I say, it's a symbol of what has happened, and we see this in the church as well. You know, I mean, how many times, and really it's the only time they get on the telly or on the radio, these religious leaders in the mainstream media, because they only get on there if they're promoting some progressive cause. And so, you know, you would never get some faithful Catholic bishop, you know, who was you know, preaching on a Sunday. That wouldn't be on the news. But if they can find some bishop of the church that will go and say, oh, you know, and I support late-term abortion. Oh, yeah, this is wonderful. And this is all over the news. And so, you know, and again, when push comes to shove, people can believe whatever they like. I believe in freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of association, all of those things. And people can disagree with me, and that no problem. You know, and sometimes they should disagree with me, but because sometimes I disagree with myself. But what you really can't do, well, what is happening is this replacement religion of progressivism means that people who wear all of the things that clergy wear, but go into the public forum and say things that are totally opposed to the doctrines of the churches, the synagogues that they are supposed to represent.
Okay, guys, Series 2, Episode 1, Resolute TV. We were pretty excited with how Series 1 turned out. We had some wins and losses in that series as far as quality of production goes, but that's what happens when you create a TV series on the fly due to lockdowns and you think, let's just do something. So we did. We were pretty happy with it. We've been asked to do it again, and we've managed to retain most of our previous guests for segments, but we've also added some new ones. Today's guest, we've got Topher Field, who's an activist, a libertarian, also an actor, I believe. And
a lapsed actor, yes.
A lapsed actor. And at the moment, you're a relatively large personality in a couple of big circles in and around the liberty movement, the freedom movement, and you're gaining a bit of traction, which is always nice. So, mate, do you want to tell these people a little bit about you and how you ended up in this position to start with, and then we'll just let the ball roll?
Oh, goodness. I fell into it by accident, and I'm still not quite sure how I got here. It all actually began, believe it or not, when my cousin, I was studying acting back in the day, and my cousin walked into where we both worked. I was a forklift driver in a refrigerated warehouse. My cousin worked there. He walked in, he said, "Hey, Topher," that was my nickname, "you need to apply for Project Next." And I said to him, "What's Project Next? I've never heard of this." It turns out it was a project being done by Andrew Denton for the ABC, where he was looking for the next generation of producers, presenters, newscasters, that sort of thing, all around sort of the news side of things. And the audition process was via video. So I thought, well, it's the ABC. They've got a pretty strong ideological bent, in my opinion. They are going to practice pretty strict editorial control over what I am or am not allowed to say. So if I'm going to work with them, I want to prove first that I'm actually going to be allowed to say what I think on subjects. So I specifically tailored my audition video to be something that I was pretty sure they weren't going to be happy with. So the audition video was all about the desalination plant and that was being built in Victoria at the time, and the fact that instead of building the desal plant, because the ABC were happy enough with anti-desalination plant type sentiment, but I was saying instead of the desal plant, we should build a dam on the Mitchell River, which is down in Gippsland, and the ABC were definitely not okay with that kind of sentiment. So that was kind of my way of going, you know what, if they say yes to me, then I know I'm actually going to get some editorial control and I'm going to be able to say what I actually think on subjects. Well, surprise, surprise, they didn't say yes. And I'll leave that to your judgment as to whether that was an ideological decision or maybe I was just rubbish and didn't deserve the nod anyway. But I then put that video up online. I started a brand new YouTube channel, 0 subscribers, put it online. This is back in the MySpace days, if I recall correctly. I sent the link to my mum and thought, you know, maybe I'll get 1 view on this video and that'll be that. And I just parked it and that was it. That was a little thing that I did that was gone now. Well, people started watching it. People on YouTube started sharing it with each other. Somehow, some engineers got a hold of it and started sharing it around saying, hey, you know, this is right. This guy's right. And they just started amongst their own sort of engineering and particularly some former Melbourne Metropolitan Board of Works engineers began sharing it amongst themselves. It ended up in the hands of Andrew Bolt, who was on his rise as towards becoming Australia's most read blogger and most read sort of opinion writer in the country. And he put it up on his blog at the time and it just went nuts from there. And then a really weird thing happened. I started getting messages in YouTube and then I started getting emails, and I don't know how people got my email address. And then I started getting phone calls. And to this day, I do not understand how did people get my phone number. But the phone would ring and there'd be a voice at the other end of the phone saying, Topher, we really need you to come and tackle this other subject, this other thing, right? Which is a surreal experience when you're a forklift driver, you know, working in a refrigerated warehouse, and you have these people at the other end of the phone who kind of, the way they're talking, you're like a baby Jesus to them. They're like, if you just come and do a video about our issue, then we'll all be saved. You're like, well, that's delusional to start with. And secondly, how desperate do you have to be reaching out to a freaking forklift driver to try and get help? And a couple of things really stood out to me at the time. I kept saying no to these people because this isn't what I do. I'm a forklift driver. That's what I do. And an aspiring actor, and this isn't acting, obviously. So it really had no appeal to me. But I began to reflect on how many people there must be that feel they're not being heard. They just don't have a voice in order for them to be reaching out to me and even asking me to do this in the first place. And I'll give you one example. The one that sticks in my mind was there was someone who reached out to me and they wanted me to do a video all about a particular intersection down towards Frankston where the council was, I think the council was putting in a roundabout and this person wanted them to put in a set of traffic lights instead. Right? That's the kind of thing. I'm like, this is just weird. This is just with the whole experience is just weird. So I said no to everybody until eventually someone came along and they put in front of me a whole bunch of really well-researched and meticulously researched documentation around the North-South pipeline, which was a water pipeline to bring water down from the irrigation districts in the north of Victoria down into Melbourne for consumption down in Melbourne. And I looked at it and I went, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. This is like, I thought the desalination plant was going to be a white elephant. This is orders of magnitude stupider than that. And I just couldn't say no, I had to do the video. And that was kind of where it actually started, where it turned from, I did an audition video for this TV show that I didn't get into, and actually became, I'm now turning into this, whatever the hell this is. I'm still figuring that out 12 years later, and turned into kind of the activist that I guess I've become since then.
Yeah. And then look, and I've found a little bit of that. So I'm a chef by trade. I don't have a doctorate. I don't have any of these things. I've fallen into this libertarian movement. I'm hanging out with people with doctorates and professors, and you know, you feel like you're with all these mental heavyweights.
We've got too many of those in the movement.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's why I've gained a little bit of modest traction in and around the libertarian group is, oh, average Joe, mate, average Joe. You're sort of in that spectre as well, and I think it's a compliment. And like you, I can't actually identify what I do for the movement. We had a meeting the other night about some upcoming elections, you know, and right, Dean, you just do what you do. Keep doing that. And I'm going, okay, cool. Well, I like those sort of tasks. That leaves me free range. But I guess that's the whole thing with being in the Libertarian movement. So, mate, you've obviously got stuck right into this Murray Darling Basin plan. Now, I recently ran in the Eden Monero by-election.
Okay.
I didn't get elected. What a shock. A Labor Party person got elected. But, you know, I made a few waves. And one of the areas that I did tackle fairly loudly was the Murray Darling Basin plan and the 2007 Water Act. Mate, what are your thoughts? You're obviously an absolute expert on it. I've got my opinions on my sort of levels of research.
I don't think any one person can really claim to be an expert on the Murray Darling Basin, the irrigation districts. It is a genuinely complex area, but I am very familiar with the broad brushstrokes, the high level stuff, and familiar enough that there's a few things that I can say fairly categorically. The conflict over who gets how much irrigation water and particularly conflict between the states over irrigation water has existed since the states were not even federated. That's been going on since the very earliest of the irrigation districts. As soon as it started to become obvious that extractions for irrigation were going to start to impact downstream flows, they were getting large enough that it was starting to have an effect downstream, the fights broke out. We've never had a perfect system. We've never had a system that was free of conflict where everyone was happy, or at least saying they were happy. You know, that negotiation thing of you never want to be the one that's happy because you lose from there, right? Everyone's got to be unhappy. So we were in a state of perpetual unhappiness, but the system was working. And when I say it was working, here's what I mean. Farmers and irrigators with irrigation licenses could make decisions around their crop rotations, around how much of an allocation they were expecting based on the rainfall that was happening. They could make projections of what their water costs were going to be so they could look at their profitability. They were able to forecast and plan. The system was reliable enough that irrigators could put in infrastructure. And if you're a dairy farmer and you want to put in a rotary dairy, this is a couple of $100,000. If you're a broadacre crop farmer or an irrigated crop farmer and you want to put in one of these big pivot type sprinklers, essentially think of it as a garden sprinkler. There's massive ones that are like these daisy chains going on and on. They can be hundreds of thousands of dollars each. These are serious infrastructure investments that these businesses are making, and they were able to do the numbers, do the projections, and go, you know what, this is a good investment. This is going to pay, because they knew they were going to get their water and they knew roughly the price they were going to have to pay for it. Enter the Water Act of 2007, and this is where it really just goes haywire. No, it was not perfect before that, but it really goes wrong at this point. The Water Act of 2007, the biggest thing that it does is it introduces the Commonwealth government through the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder as a holder of water. And it invented this body called the Murray Darling Basin Authority and basically gave it $13 billion worth of taxpayers' money to buy up irrigation water and park it into this Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder. Their argument and what they were saying was the river is dying. Now, that's an interesting term to begin with, but we'll park that for a moment. Their claim was the river is dying. There's all sorts of ecological harm going on. We, the government, need to get all this water and use it and have it for environmental purposes to breed frogs and grasses and trees and fish and everything else and protect the health and save the river from dying. And so therefore, and we're going to do it through the market mechanism. It was a Liberal government at the time. It was actually under Turnbull who wrote the legislation in the first place. And then when Kevin Rudd won in 2007, the legislation was passed under the Kevin Rudd government. So it's very much a bipartisan effort between Liberal and Labor. Labor liked it because it was looking after the environment, which protected their left flank from the Greens. Right, they could claim the environmental credentials. The Liberals liked it because there was a lot of money to be made in water trading, and there's been a lot of shady stuff go on since then. But also because they could say it's a market mechanism; it's going to be more efficient. Well, it isn't a market mechanism if you have this elephant in the room in the form of the federal government with a $13 billion budget and no financial accountability. They don't have to earn money off this water. They're not a market participant in the normal sense of the word. They have no economic incentive or disincentive to buy or sell at a particular price. They just have this massive pool of money that they just spend on water. Simple as that. Now think about any industry, any commodity, any consumable, any input into any business. Let's take petrol, for example, right? Let's say that the supply of petrol was fixed. In the same way that rainfall is fixed, it varies every single year, but ultimately we can't really influence how much there is. It is whatever it is, right? And let's say petrol works that way as well. And we've all adapted to driving a certain amount. Businesses have a certain number of trucks, deliveries happen in a certain way. We've all kind of reached this equilibrium of how much petrol is going to be available, how much it's going to cost for us, and therefore what kind of business we can do. People have invested in infrastructure and warehouses and trucks and all sorts of things based on the availability and the price of petrol. Now take 1/3 of all of that petrol out of the system. Now, that's what the Commonwealth government did through the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder. They bought up 1/3 of the irrigation water. What is going to happen to the price of the remaining petrol or water? And what is going to happen to all those businesses that have debts and owe money on the infrastructure that they put in before that water or petrol, whatever the analogy you want to use, was taken out of the system? What we saw was absolutely inevitable. And I got involved in this, and I think it was 2011 when there was a draft plan put forward. So the legislation was passed in 2007, but that tasked the the Murray Darling Basin Authority with the job of coming up with a plan. And the draft plan was released in 2011. And I read it and I went, this is now the new most ridiculous document I've ever read. Previously, it was the one that I mentioned earlier, the North-South pipeline. Okay, that was the most absurd thing that I had ever seen in my life up to that point in time. This took the cake. This was the new front runner for the most ridiculous document that I've ever read in my life. It was completely unreferenced. So they were making all these claims about water in the Murray Darling Basin, what it used to be like prior to human intervention, all these sorts of things. No references. My absolute favorite was at one stage they say a group of scientists and riverine ecologists said da-da-da-da, and they go on to repeat the claim. They never say who this group is. Now, if you attempted that in a year 10 essay, you would get failed. If you tried to pull it up, like, it's just the most absurd thing. And yet here is this government body with an enormous amount of funding making very, very heavyweight decisions that affect a lot of people. And yet they were getting away with zero references on so much of what they claimed and so much of what they said. I did a video just pulling that document to pieces. It's just one of the most absurd documents that you've ever seen in your life. They went ahead and they passed it anyway. They delayed for about 6 months as a result of my video and some of the other protests that were going on in Deniliquin when they were burning copies of the draft plan. Alan Jones got stuck in using using questions that I had asked in my video. He repeated them to the Water Minister himself because he was able to get the Water Minister into an interview. And the Water Minister turned around and said, okay, fine, we'll go back to community consultation, which of course is just a ruse. They go and sit there and nod and smile for a couple of months and then go ahead and do whatever the hell they were going to do anyway. So that was sort of the journey into all of that in the first place. And the result since then has been water is predictably extremely expensive, very unreliable. People don't know, they can't forecast anymore how much they're going to get and whether it's even going to be affordable. Now you've got people who are sitting there, they've got overheads, they've got debts on rotary dairies or whatever other things might be. They have to produce, otherwise they go under because of the bank loans. But every megaliter of water they buy loses them money. Yep. So now if they produce, if they don't produce, they're dead. If they do produce, they get killed by the water costs and they're dead. They're going backwards anyway, yeah. They've been put into this awful, just a horrible, horrible situation where we've seen a lot of suicides come out of it. We've seen a lot of depression come out of it. An enormous number of good people have just left the industry, and we've lost all of what they know about their land, which in some cases is multi-generational knowledge about how to run those farms and run that land. We've lost all of that. And just the broken hearts, the broken dreams, the human impact of this has been astonishing. And then you have to look at the human impact in terms of world food prices and what that does to world hunger. We have right now the World Health Organization warning that because of the COVID-19 shutdowns and how that's impacted food supply, we're going to see another 130 million people going into starvation before the end of this year. Now, they came out with that warning in April, and I put out a video at the time saying, hey, if we give all this water being held by the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder, if we gave that to our farmers to grow food, they'd be able to feed a couple of million. Yep. Well, not the lot, but easily millions.
Well, when I say feed the lot, I mean if every government did the same sort of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, look, I sat down and I did some basic, and I haven't got the exact figures here with me, but 50 to 60 odd million people die annually. For COVID, they're at 600, 700,000, I think, globally that they're up to. I mean, and counting Australia, we're up to, 200 and something. Mm-hmm. And I think on average, 5-6 million people die of starvation every year.
Yeah.
We don't have this sort of fallout. We've gone into, 180 something billion worth of debt that we've borrowed. I'm pretty sure the 180 would probably fund the food production for the 5 or 6 million, as opposed to worrying about the 600,000. And you sit there and people go, "You're so mean," and I go, "Hang on a minute, I think I'm just being a pragmatist. We could say 5 or 6 million people here, or we could really, really cause catastrophe, not save them at all, and allow the other 500,000, 600,000 or 700,000 now die." And you're sort of going, where's the trade-off here? And to me, it all comes back to government incompetence, government control, and
And the thing that really gets me is we know now that there is going to be a huge humanitarian disaster as a result of the impact of COVID-19, and not the disease, but the shutdowns on the supply of food. We know that for a fact. We know that millions of people are going to die as a result of that. And yet the federal government in Australia still says, "Oh no, we need that water so that we can spark breeding events for fish and for native grasses." They are now making a literal moral decision in full knowledge of what they're doing. They are literally making the moral decision to prioritize frogs and fish and grass over people's lives because those people aren't on their doorstep.
Chippy! Bull? Ready? Ready? Good boy!
Righto, gang. Season 2, episode 1, and we're pretty pumped to be back. Stephen Wells joining us again, our exalted author, our director of Wrong Think, what else can we call you? There's untold amounts of names we could call you, all of them positive, of course.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Mate, welcome back. Thanks for rejoining us for Series 2. There seemed to be enough interest in having another red-hot crack at this, so we thought, why not? Let's do it.
I'm even officially part of it now, so thanks for the t-shirt. Just flash it around.
Look at that, yeah. Anyone who does look at these and go, $25 a pop, just send us a message and we'll post the bastards out to you.
Yeah,
same with fetching caps.
My opinions are bought and paid for now. I've got a t-shirt.
Mate, that's it. I own you.
That's it. I'm corrupted. I'm just your bitch now.
The proud property of the Dissident Squad, which by rights I actually did purchase that name the other day. So we actually own that as part of the branding. I thought, you know what, with everything going on, I think it's a good time to put together a Dissident Squad and start firing off some darts at the powers that be, mate. And you're certainly one of those individuals in that category, as I suppose am I. How have you been, mate? How have you been since we last caught up on camera?
Yeah, well, in WA, we've got this illusion of freedom going on at the moment, which is kind of it's been nice to enjoy. We can go anywhere within the state again. We can do all the things that we normally do without getting arrested. Anything apart from actually leave the glorious Democratic Republic of Western Australia, or come into the glorious Republic of, as long as WA is your whole world, then things are fine and dandy. People who have relationships outside of WA have a bit more of an issue. And and then behind the curtains, of course, we've got Mark McGowan passing laws that make him immune from prosecution and immune from the government being sued if the government ever screws you over. And of course, he's popular as hell because nobody likes Clive Palmer, who's trying to fight against him. I mean, it's a sad state of affairs when the champion of freedom is Clive Palmer. I mean, I think we're lost.
It is pretty scary. Poor old Clive. I had some very, very minor dealings with him back, if you recall, around the time he lost his A-League franchise, the Gold Coast soccer team, when he had his Gold Coast team, and they sort of stripped him of his license and called him a bastard. It actually coincided with me and a few mates over here extrapolating ourselves from the New South Wales Football Association. I think that's what they call themselves. The Australian you know, the FFA and the New South Wales football, whatever. And we were a bunch of old blokes playing soccer, and I sort of with a couple of mates kind of got a bit tired of their bullshit and being fed down directives to old weekend warriors who were just trying to have a good time with their mates. So we kind of we separated ourselves and we pulled our own little republic of soccer at the time. We called it the New South Wales Amateur Soccer Association. We decided, since you pricks want to call yourselves football, we'll go back to soccer, and we'll go and kick a ball around with our mates on weekends. And we did that for a little while, and we had an independent competition. And since it was in line with the time Clive broke away on his own and started talking big publicly about how he was going to launch his own league, I thought, well, we're kind of halfway there, mate. Maybe we can do some sort of a bit of a deal or help each other out or something, but he sort of was fairly vague, and the bloke that he had in charge was even vaguer. So not sure what the outcome there was. But we had a good time. I had Football Australia ban me from all representative duties, which I thought was funny. I didn't realise I was in line for Socceroos Guernsey, but anyway, apparently I must have been in the scope, And the 60-year-old goalkeeper that did it with me, I don't think he's not quite 60, but 50-plus-year-old goalkeeper that was sort of the other ringleader with me. He was quite shocked to learn that he must have been in line for a Socceroos Guernsey at the same time, because he was banned as well. So never dull with these overreaching lunatics.
Yeah. I mean, we've certainly been prepped for what's happened this year, haven't we? I mean, the Liberal Democrats have been banging on about it for years and years, about the stupidity of bike helmet laws and the vaping laws and all of the small fry stuff, all of the small fry bureaucratic stuff. And I think, because nobody put up a protest against that, and everybody just says, it's basically empowered all of these tyrannical dictators to really come out and go full on dictators once something that appears to be a real threat comes along. It's like, oh, well, you wear a helmet because of bike laws, so why won't you wear a mask when there's lives on the line, as the saying goes. And you're trying to say, look, I've been fighting against bike helmet laws ever since I fucking got here. I never wanted those. I never agreed with those. I thought they were stupid. So don't come to me and say, you wear a bike helmet. Yeah. Only because I don't want to have my head kicked in like the bloke the other week,
100%. Nanny state laws, mate, nanny state laws, and they opened the gate for this sort of bullshit that's currently going on. You and I and a couple of other people did a paradigm shift earlier mid last lot, which went quite well. It's still sort of growing in viewership, and it's going to turn into its own brand this season, with a heap of topics and a heap of guests. But, mate, you've hit the nail on the head. It's the boil frog. He sits in the water. If it rises slowly, the temperature up she goes. He has no idea that he's cooking, and that's currently what's happening to the Australian people, but also most of the Western world. I noticed that Boris Johnson, who we all thought was going to be a great hero for Britain, seems to have shit the bed. I don't know if you saw any of that today.
What an absolute disgrace. It just goes to show you that the major parties are all in on it. There is no Labour Liberal. There is no Conservative Labour. There is no Republican Democrat. There are just tyrannical elite arseholes and the rest of us. What an absolute, what a betrayal. What a betrayal of the people who got him in on the Brexit notion. And he's watered down Brexit as well. It's Brexit in name only. They're still all tied to the EU, and God knows how many things have gone under the table. But officially Brexit is done. And the UK. There's the craziness of it. What someone was saying to me, that the stupidity of his laws is that if you are a hunter, you are exempt from the 6-person rule. So it meant that a child couldn't go and feed a duck, but 30 hunters could go out and shoot a duck.
Yeah.
So you couldn't get 6 children in a group feeding the ducks, but you could get 30 hunters going out and shooting them. That's the stupidity of of the laws, and still people are swallowing it, and still people are just got Stockholm syndrome and keeping us safe, and it's depressing. It really is depressing, and the question we've all got to start asking ourselves is what happens when we become, because we are the minority at the moment, what happens when the majority start using the government to oppress you? Like, let's say there's 2 million people in Australia who are totally opposed to being under house arrest and all of the lockdown rules and feel absolutely as if they're under tyranny, but 20 odd million Australians say it's a good thing and you need to be locked up. That's a very, very dangerous situation.
And to be fair, mate, I know you're a bit like I am, you don't use social media stuff because you necessarily enjoy it. And I'm sure you've got friends like I do who go, all you do on Facebook is talk politics and attack the government. It's like, it's the only fucking point for it. The people I like to talk to, do you know what I do? I do this, or I'll give them a call, or I'll go and catch up with them for a beer. I don't go on this bloody contraption because I want to talk to people. No. Not about, you know what I mean? It's not a happy smiley device. Facebook, as far as I'm concerned, is a tool for actually trying to wake up the masses to the absolute tyranny it's not even creeping in anymore. I mean, Victoria's shown fairly well that they're just stomping in now. And they're fucking loving it.
And getting away with it. And that's the really sad thing, is that they're getting away with it. The real question comes is how do we stand up against it? What do we do next? Because it really is in the state now where police can just turn up at your house and arrest you for saying wrong thing now. And now Victoria, of course, are passing laws that saying that they can any conspiracy theorists like ourselves can simply be arrested without charge and held indefinitely.
And can be arrested by any public servant appointed by the fucking premier.
Yeah, not
so
even
Dan Andrews essentially can I don't know, deputise, I don't know if that's the right word, deputise the local secretary down at the council and go, hey, feel free to go and lock anybody up you like, because I think you're a nice person and I'd like to see you enforce my rules. It's fucking mental, mate. Like, now this episode's this comes out 4th, so the 4th of October we're launching again as our official first episode date. So this may be a touch dated by the time we get there. So I'm sure a whole bunch more shit's going to happen between now and then. But I'm trying to make episode 1 a bit of an extravaganza for series 2. So, mate, when you look at stuff like, I mean, Dan Andrews, how he hasn't been assassinated yet has me baffled.
Yeah.
Now,
I think it. I personally have been saying from the beginning that I think it's only a matter of time before things really break out and somebody just loses the plot. I mean, it doesn't take much for somebody just to go. I mean, we've had people losing the plot and killing themselves already.
Yeah.
We've had people taking their own lives. So it's not much of a stretch to think that there's just somebody who just thinks, well, bugger it. My life isn't worth living anymore, but before I go, I'm going to take out the bastard who made it so. And that kind of mentality that's human nature. You get enough people getting pushed down enough, and you'll eventually get people who will snap. And then the whole media circus will come out and say, oh, you know, what a terrible person that was, and blah, 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 and we should never, 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 and we should all condemn this person. Look, when it happens, and I think it will happen, I refuse to. I will refuse to condemn anybody who snaps. Not because I intend on snapping myself, not that I encourage anybody to snap, but I'm not going to start condemning them.
No, that's right.
Yeah,
mate.
Yeah.
You know my philosophy. Do no harm but take no shit philosophy, and the bottom line is anybody who does snap has taken an awful lot of shit. So the do no harm is starting to sort of you poke a bear long enough. You know, I'm really for non-violence, but I tell you, I can fully understand anybody who wants to react violently. It makes perfect logical sense. You've got police belting into people's homes, arresting pregnant mothers. You've got them. You know,
that 69-year-old lady the other day, she wasn't even there for the protest. She'd gone to do some online stuff, was coming back. The dog needed a pee, so she took it out for a walk, and then came across the woman being arrested and thought, oh, I'll just help her hold her banner because it all seemed to be like a peaceful arrest. I'll just help her fold her banner. Next thing I know, she's got 6 policemen, jumping on her and hurting her arm and arresting her. And then she's given a fine for being outside the 5-kilometer zone. And she says, well, I had my permit. And they're like, well, yeah, but you've got to go straight there and straight back. You can't stop along the way to let the dog have a pee. And the worst one, the breaking news one, which is just coming out today, is the kid.
Just about to mention it, I reckon.
Yeah,
I reckon I know the one you're about to say.
Yeah, a kid lost in the bush, and volunteers turn up to help. Police say you're breaking all our COVID rules. Go home. And it's curfew in soon anyway, so everyone goes home because curfew and lockdown laws and everything else. Poor kids died. I mean, if any, I really just can't countenance anybody who says this is for our safety anymore. I really can't.
Mate, look, I was going to bring this topic up, so I knew it had come up between you and I because I'm sure we watch similar news feeds. This poor kid, and they actually interviewed his brother and some of his mates, who were going out on dirt bikes trying to look for this little bloke that had obviously died. I don't know the time frame on, when he died to when they could have found him, sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? But what you've got, the Freedom Puppy wants to make an appearance. Of course he does. Good boy. But I mean, they interviewed some of these kids, and they're going, "We don't care about the 5K radius, the whatever." I can't remember the little bloke's name.
The lockdown laws.
He's missing. We want to go and find him. He could be in danger, and clearly he was in fucking danger. But due to COVID laws, they had 10 coppers out looking for him. Now, don't quote me on the 10 because I'm sure that's a number I just arbitrarily pulled out of my backside. But they could have had hundreds of people out helping and supporting the search. And instead, they had a handful of coppers who I'm sure the coppers in theory mean well. But I really genuinely hope everybody who made that decision to stop those volunteers from going out over some bullshit COVID rule of 5 kilometres or whatever, and anybody who enforced it. And we all know the Nuremberg philosophy that it's, I just enforced the law. I just did my job. I wasn't my choice.
Yeah,
I hope every single one of them takes it personally. I hope every single one of them doesn't sleep again and holds that child's death. I really hope it haunts them because they fucking deserve it. It's disgusting.
They deserve to be arrested. They deserve to be arrested for criminal negligence, manslaughter, and God knows, any. I'm not a legal expert, but there must be laws in there somewhere making stuff like that illegal. And
of course, there's enough other laws.
Yeah, public prosecutors need to find whatever the legal definition of what they did that we all know was wrong, that we all know was immoral, we all know, has put this kid's life in danger. We don't obviously know whether.
Beyond danger, they haven't just put him in danger now.
Well, he's died, so we don't know whether he's died before they enforced this law or after they've enforced this law. But either way, it was a situation where time was of the essence and manpower is of the essence. They've denied it for some bullshit reason, and the result is the kid's dead. Whether the kid would still be alive if they'd not done that, we will never know. We will never know whether it could have helped or not. But the point was that was something that definitely made his chances of survival less, and they should be prosecuted for it.
Righty on, we're live, ladies and gentlemen. Bitcoin for Idiots Series 2, Episode 1. Stephan Livera, thanks for rejoining us, mate. Nice to see you again.
Thank you for having me, Dan. Good to chat again.
It's good fun, mate. This is, if nothing else, I'm learning a shit ton of stuff from all you guys, which makes it well worth the while. A very fetching T-shirt I see you wearing as well, eh?
Yeah,
it's good to see.
The
Resolute, no, good fun, mate. Good fun. So, thanks for coming on board. Really appreciate your contribution. It's quite funny. I've had a couple of conversations recently with people who had no idea about the project, this sort of project. And you've got Stephan Livera. I'm right into Bitcoin. That's really cool. I went, oh, really? There you go. Who knew? A lot of people just haven't really done the crossover thing yet and worked out what's what. So that's pretty cool, mate. You must be making some impact, which is always good.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, one of the recent big news pieces within the Bitcoin world is a company called MicroStrategy, who recently purchased $425 million of Bitcoin, and they are using it as part of their corporate treasury. They're a NASDAQ-listed big company in the US. I think their market cap is about $1.5 billion. And interestingly enough, the CEO of that company, Michael Saylor, noted as part of his education on my recent episode with him that my show is actually part of that education story for him. And I think this is an interesting case study that more businesses will follow. And it shows you what kind of environment we're in. It shows you equities, stock markets are, ridiculously high right now. So there's not, on average, you're not going to be expecting very big gains over the next 10 years in real terms. And if you're looking at the bond returns, well, they're not really great either. And so it just becomes this kind of story of where do you even park your cash if you need a cash balance? So I think this is part of the story with MicroStrategy, and we're seeing other businesses also speak about this. And for a big public company to then invest this much money into Bitcoin, it's quite impressive in that way. Yeah.
It's exciting, mate. It's exciting. We only just sort of touched on it, so I had no idea up until you'd sort of said that. I tend to, in all honesty, I flick through episodes and I drive in the car and I listen to somebody's podcast and I listen to something you're doing or something somebody else is doing, and we can only listen to so many podcasts as humans, and there's a lot of them getting around, and it's been really positive. So I've been getting a lot of positive questions about the Bitcoin stuff, and and I just go, check out Stephan's stuff, like all this. All I'm doing here is a little gateway drug, I suppose. Just check it out, and if I can figure some of it out, I've got a little collection of Bitcoin that's gradually, developing, and I can't retire on it yet, but it's exciting and it's fun to watch. The fun to watch part is the tricky part, I think, for people, and I think that goes with any investment. Some people watch it and you see them stressing themselves to I went up, I went down. You're going to give yourself a heart attack. I like to put little bits of money wherever and just sort of go, let's watch the fluctuations. Let's see if we can see any discernible patterns or anything that stands out as consistent or really interesting. And the Bitcoin stuff, at one stage, it sort of went right up there for a little while, and then it sort of dropped back down a little bit, and then it went up again. And mate, after the halving, which we spoke about last series, when are we going to see $300,000 Bitcoins?
Well, that might be maybe in a couple of years. Who knows? I mean, for me, I don't get as much about what I would say is really think of it like a long-term thing. This is a long-term play, 5, 10, 15 years kind of play. And I know that can be difficult for people to extract themselves out of the modern day news cycle, because the current news cycle is there to kind of keep you engaged. And so whenever there's like a price move, you might see the news come out and say, oh, look, the stock market did this today, or, oh, look, the property market did that today, or the bonds market doing this. And really what you have to do with Bitcoin is sort of understand more about the overall thesis and see if you zoom out on that overall trend, you see where it's going. And so I think that's the other thing. The other part that's important is Bitcoin, like just statistically speaking, many of the gains, like the positive return days, it's something like 12 or 15 days in the year where most of the gains come. So if you're not invested in that time, you're going to miss out. And so it's kind of like a message where if you listen to, say, a typical personal finance person, they might say, it's not about timing the market, it's about time in the market. And so I think it's a similar kind of message there, where you just want to think of it. You want to obviously do your reading, do your learning, read the Bitcoin Standard, listen to some of my shows, and then you'll eventually sort of come to a point where you think, I think this actually makes some sense in terms of me to regularly buy some. And I think that's where it kind of starts. But it's a journey, right? So, sometimes it can look too complicated with like, oh, what's a blockchain? How's the mining work? How's the cryptography work? Oh, it can be overwhelming. And I get that. So I would say keep it simple, just buy a small amount and start learning. And then over time, you'll kind of increase your knowledge and then increase your conviction.
Man, and that's why we did it the way we did it in episode 1 is, like I'm so clueless on it really still, and I'm still learning a little bit. But I know there's so many thousands and thousands of people in Australia who go, Bitcoin, oh, that's scary, or Bitcoin, that's good. So it's really nice for you and I, and a lot of people know me as pretty much an everyman kind of guy. I'm not a uni graduate. I'm not an overeducated lunatic who's, talking down to people, just a guy. And if I can start to get my head around it, hopefully it'll open doors for other people to kind of go, yeah, really? Oh, okay. It's not as scary as I thought. It demystifies it a little bit. And to see a big company like the one you mentioned before that's going all in on it, or not all in on it, obviously, because they still like to have, I'm sure, plenty of fiat money and plenty of bonds and stocks and whatever else they've got. But it is really nice to see a couple of big players start to dip their toe in the water, because unfortunately the society we've got, when a big company does something, for some reason it validates the process. If you or I do it, we might be outliers or a bit risky or a bit whatever, but Microsoft did it, so it must be fine. Or ANZ Bank did it, so it's all perfectly legal and above board. But if Stephan Livera does it, it could be a bit shonky,
Yeah,
could be
exactly.
a bit crazy, So it's, in a way, it's a really good thing, So, mate, what do you reckon was their motivation? You spoke to was it the CEO or the president?
Yeah, CEO. Yeah. Yeah. Why did they do it? Well, essentially, think of it this way. MicroStrategy are a big company with, I think, something like $500 billion worth in cash. Now, their problem is we are living in a high inflation environment. Right now, the CPI, consumer price inflation, might be low, maybe 2 or 3% per year, but the real amount that's actually being printed is much more than that. And so his view was, look, I'm sitting on a big ice cube here. I don't want to sit here with $500 million in cash that's losing maybe 10% of its real purchasing power value every year. We don't want to do that. And he didn't want to do all this work to get revenue just to stay still. You don't want to do that. You want something that's going to hold its value over the longer term. And that's why he took that decision to educate his C-level executives in the company and also educate his board of directors about Bitcoin as a way to basically preserve their value for the longer term. And that comes down to, why do we hold a cash balance, right? And so I think the way to think of this is, for some companies, they might have a pile of cash, but they've also got some debt. And so if inflation is happening, well, then at least the amount they have to pay back in debt is coming down over time. But if you are a company like MicroStrategy, which had a high kind of cash balance position, but not that much debt, well, you're just losing value over time, right? It just becomes a way that more people are starting to realize this is an incredible tool that can be used to store value in a way that's not so influenced by central banking. And so that's kind of the message. And the idea is, if it makes sense for individuals, it makes sense for private companies, it makes sense for public companies, and even some governments, we suspect, are looking into this kind of thing as a way of having maybe a small reserve of Bitcoins. Or there are certain countries around the world that are basically supporting having a Bitcoin mining operation in their country. So the way I see it, in the earlier days, people said oh, look, the government's going to ban Bitcoin and so on. Really, it's more like different governments. Okay, yeah, sure, it's possible that some governments ban it, but others will support it. Others will do things like, hey, we want Bitcoin mining here. We want to be competitive internationally, or we want to be able to hold our value in a way that's not being debased. And so I think it's a broader understanding. Once you understand kind of the environment around you in terms of politically, the government, and what's happening in terms of people having a desire or their wish to print more money so they can, politicians can be more popular by saying, hey, look at all the free goodies I'm giving you. Once you understand that environment, you're looking for ways to protect yourself. And Bitcoin is, in my view, the best way to protect yourself.
Mate, well, it's definitely on my list of things that I've been sort of, spending a fair bit of time looking at, of course. And the other thing, and I know that's not your area of expertise, but is the gold and silver and things like that. I'm always looking at alternatives. So I think it's important for people too. It's crazy times, mate. Like this, they keep using terms like unprecedented, and I say, well, it's not really unprecedented. I think the reaction to it qualifies as unprecedented. Not necessarily the pandemic. It's the carry-on that's gone on with it that seems to be completely unprecedented. I've never seen such a bunch of snowflakes crying and getting hysterical over a death rate that it is, which is still sad, but it's also thrown so much chaos into the standard financial markets, and it's thrown so much panic into people that I think things like Bitcoin are where people are going to do quite well. Some people are going to do really well, and they say with every catastrophe there's winners and losers, and I'm sort of hoping that our listeners and our supporters, yours, mine, and everybody else's, will be the ones who come out on top because they've got alternative strategies as opposed to wait for the government to pat you on the head and tell you you're a good boy and you can continue to do as you're told. So look, mate, I think anybody who's looking outside the box needs to jump on your podcast. I think that they're mad if they don't. As I said, I've listened to quite a few episodes, and I won't bullshit you. You know, sometimes you get so in depth, and I think, oh Christ, this is why I do the dummies version. You know, but that's kind of the idea, mate. And you know, I spoke to a guy the other day who reckons he's almost at the point where he lives solely on the Bitcoin standard. Which I thought was really, really interesting. You know, he's not a big-time billionaire. He's not bouncing around in Ferraris. Great guy, really nice guy. I met him almost by default. You know, a friend of a friend introduced us and thought we might have a bit worth talking about, and that's worked out to be fairly accurate. And yeah, he was a big fan of your work.
Nice.
Which is interesting because with the guest list we've got, you find some people relate to one guest or another guest or whatever. And this guy was, oh, you've got Stephan Livera. That's huge. And I went, oh, I didn't realize it was huge. I met him a couple of times. Seemed like a really nice bloke. Seems to know his stuff, you know, like top guy. Happy to talk to him about something he knows more. No. Stephan's just like, he is the expert, mate. So it was a really good, not that I didn't think you were already an expert, but it was just nice to meet somebody who I didn't already know. Who sort of was held you in such high esteem, mate, which was really cool. But he's borderline living on Bitcoin, which I thought was really interesting. You know,
it's like the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed, right? I can't remember who said that, but it's like a famous saying. And I think there are some people out there like your friend who they're already in some way living in the future, right? Because they might have a job and buy Bitcoin straight away, or they might earn Bitcoin directly. And then they're valuing their net worth in Bitcoin terms because they see it like in the future, it's going to be denominated in Satoshis or Bitcoins and Satoshis. So yeah. I think that's probably an interesting takeaway and a great message.
So I think it's really tops. And I was sort of talking to him about the idea of adding an entire paradigm shift episode just dedicated to Bitcoin and alternative financial markets. So obviously when we do that, we'll try and get yourself on. And I'm thinking of a couple of other sort of people in that space that would be really interesting just to have one of those discussions where we talk, you know, alternatives and reasons why and just have a really cool discussion. And as usual, I'll try and dumb it down for the lowest common denominator like myself.
That sounds great. I'd be happy to join.
I think it'll be a really cool episode where we've got a heap of other things. We're going to do cannabis legalization as a program, but we'll do it as a live stream as well. So hopefully people can chime in with their questions. I reckon that'd be a pretty cool upcoming event.
Great.
But mate, as always, thank you for coming on and talking Bitcoin with me. It's always enlightening. I had no idea that the companies were doing that. So that's really cool. Our first episode, mate, for Series 2 is going live Sunday the 4th. 7:30 on our YouTube program, and we'll gradually roll it out onto all the others. We've actually got a Stephan Livera Bitcoin for Idiots special being compiled as we speak. So I don't know if you've noticed, we've been just releasing the little specials with all the interviews over the period of time. So they're putting together a consequential, you know, for all the ones that we've done. So the whole first 10 episodes, and we'll release that, and that'll be really cool. Yeah, it's all happening, mate. It's all good fun, and it's great to have you on board again. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Chat soon.
Talk soon, mate. I think you and I have almost got this down.
On you go.
No, you're all right, mate. Don't worry, we edited it anyway, so we'll cut out anything at the start that doesn't quite fit. That's cool. Nothing to panic about.
Right, okay.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, episode...
I'm not looking for.
Hey?
How you doing? You all right? You okay?
Yeah, mate. Yeah. I'll do this little intro and then we'll kick off. Oh, you're frozen? No, you're there. That's all right.
Right,
beautiful.
okay. On you go.
Rightio, ladies and gentlemen. Episode 1, Series 2, Resolute TV. It's been called Libertarian TV, but we're not officially Libertarians, and we've had all sorts of weird, wonderful, and interesting people on. Now, one of history's
greatest libertarians in theory, certainly from the movies and the books, would be one Sir William Wallace, a Scottish legend, somewhat immortalised in the movie Braveheart, starring Mel Gibson. I don't know how Scottish Mel is. I think he's more Aussie than he is Scottish, but he seems to have done a pretty good job of upselling the story of William Wallace. And what I've done is I've reached out to the head of the William Wallace Society in Scotland. Obviously, we couldn't get William himself to come on. That's a little bit hard. I believe he was hung, drawn, and quartered many years ago. So we've got Garry Stewart. So, Garry, welcome aboard. Thanks for coming on. Mate, the story of William Wallace. The story of William Wallace. What a crackerjack story from a libertarian perspective. We love the idea of telling the king to bash his taxes and everything else up his ass. And most of us would all love to have a crack at overthrowing a king and our governments and all these sort of things. Mate, tell us a little bit about, first, I suppose, yourself, how you got involved in the William Wallace Society in Scotland, what the society does, and then let's talk about the great man himself and why he is so valuable to particularly Scottish history, but also world history.
Basically, Dean, I've always been into Scottish history from a very early age. I followed Scotland abroad through the football team. A couple of guys within the Tartan Army that I got to know, knew the convener of the site of William Wallace. I'm probably going back about 30 years ago now. I got introduced to Davy, and so from there I sort of got involved with the society. We started off a William Wallace Tartan Army sort of banner. Davy came along, did a speech about Wallace, just obviously to, people have watched Braveheart, excuse me, might not know the true story. And Davy was an inspiration to me, to be honest with you. He was one of the types of guys, probably like William Wallace himself, that you could go into four walls, into a castle, and Davy would start talking, but he had something about him that he would just make the castle come alive. And you'd expect William Wallace, because you get transfixed into what he was saying. So getting involved with Davy and obviously becoming my friend, that's how I got involved with the society. As I said, about 30, probably 35 years ago now. What we do is we basically keep William Wallace's name alive. That's basically what it is. We do. We educate. We educate through schools. We do talks to old people's homes. One of the major things we do, there was a letter that was on William Wallace when he was captured in 1305 called the Safe Conduct Letter, which was a letter from the King of France to William Wallace to allow him to go and seek an audience with the Pope. Now, that letter has been in London since 1305 when William Wallace was captured. Now, my ex-convener, Davy Ross, started a campaign way back to get the letter back to where it belonged in Scotland. Unfortunately, Davy passed away probably about a couple of years after we started the campaign. 7 years of campaigning later, we managed to get the letter back in Scotland. So that's part of what we decided to do. We try and get historical artefacts back. We built a monument to Battle of the Bell of the Bray, which was in 1219, which not a lot of people know about. So we built that in Glasgow, in the necropolis. If you go on our website, you can see the photographs of it. Even if I say so myself, it's sort of pretty impressive, to be honest. Built a couple of plaques in Rob Royston, which is where Sir John Menteith agreed to betray William Wallace. Now, I stay probably about a mile away from Rutherglen, which is where the church is, and nobody knew. So one of the reasons of it's not so much putting the plaques up just so we feel good, but it's putting the plaques up to educate people, that people know what actually happened in that place. Now, Davy, again, for the 700th anniversary of William Wallace's death, Davy wanted to do something special. So he walked the same length that William Wallace was dragged from Glasgow all the way down to London. And then we all went down. It was probably about 1,500 of us, all kilted up, plaided up, weaponed up. We all had swords and that. Well, I had a wee gun as well, in fairness, axes. And the police in London could not have been nicer. And the weapons that we carried are not little plasticky things. These stuff's real. I mean, this stuff's real, basically. So the police were fantastic. Wallace was dragged through London, probably about 6.5 miles up to West St Bartholomew's Hospital. We did the 6.5 mile march through London. Police were blocking off traffic, whatever else. We then had a church service in St Bartholomew's Church, and then we had a little party at the end to remember William Wallace. Again, it wasn't so much it was to promote the society. It was also to promote William Wallace, that people were aware it was the 700th anniversary. Again, what we talked about right at the start, when we're off air, the government side of things don't like Braveheart. It's too, in the political landscape of what Scotland is at the moment, they don't like what he stands for, and it makes our job a little bit more difficult. I mean, we are a charitable status, the society. So from that point, we don't get involved with politics. It's something we just don't get involved with at all because of what it is we do. We do speak to, with what we do speak to Labour politicians, we do speak to Tory politicians, councillors and all the rest of it. So we try and stay out of that purely because of what we do as a society. But it does make it difficult with regards to what Wallace stands for, and obviously what the political landscape in Scotland is at the moment. So it does make it a little bit difficult not to get dragged into that side of the argument. But it's like Bell of the Brain monument that we did in Glasgow. That took me 7 years in Scotland to get a monument built in Glasgow to Scotland, arguably Scotland's greatest hero. And we had to jump through hoops because Glasgow Council's pretty not exactly what you would say pro-Scottish, if that makes sense, more sort of British. And they didn't want the monument built because it's too Scottish. So it does make it a little bit more difficult because of the political landscape in Scotland now. So that does help us. But we do, as I said to you earlier on, we meet some wonderful people through it. I mean, I've got, with the society, we've got members in Liechtenstein, America, Argentina, Brazil. We've got guys in Australia, Germany, all around the world. Because of the film Braveheart, people have got to know William Wallace, read up on the story. I think the greatest thing is people will then look at Wallace and then maybe look at their own country's political agenda as well, and maybe have a bit, although it's Scotland in the film Braveheart, they might see a little bit of their own country in the William Wallace story. And I think that's why he appeals worldwide, if I'm honest with you. And I think that's the big thing about where it comes from with the freedom thing. There's so many countries worldwide. And I think that the one thing that people miss is that when William Wallace and Andrew de Moray, who was his sidekick, who unfortunately died just after the Battle of Stirling Bridge, we don't know the exact date. And it's a shame that Andrew's not in Braveheart, because when William Wallace started the uprising in Scotland, in the lowlands of Scotland, Andrew de Moray started the uprising in the Highlands. They both met up at Stirling Bridge, became friends and fought on the same side. Unfortunately, because Andrew de Moray's not in the film Braveheart, most people don't actually know about him. And he is up there with William Wallace in conjunction with what he did for Scotland. And that's about the only bit in Braveheart that I don't like about it, because Andrew de Moray's often sort of forgotten. There is an Andrew de Moray Society, and just like in 1290, with Wallace and De Mori being best of friends. We are fantastic friends with the Andrew De Mori Society. We try and promote Andrew De Mori as much as William Wallace, as they do as well on both sides. So that's about the only thing I've got against the film.
Right, guys, ladies and gentlemen, Series 2, Resolute TV, Episode 1. We've got Adam Kokesh, so we had a cracking lineup for Series 1. This time we've got this legend, Libertarian legend, Adam Kokesh, who ran for non-president of the United States, and we'll get into that in a minute. He's a Libertarian activist, citizen journalist. I've been watching a few Adam versus the Man videos this morning with you giving grief to everybody who deserves grief. You run a podcast, again, called Adam versus the Man. You're a combat veteran of the Iraq War, which is pretty, I imagine, shaped a lot of what you've done, where you've been and everything else. And you're an advocate for Iraq vets versus the war. So you're an everywhere man. You're a big personality. Mate, thank you for coming on. It's a real pleasure to have you on board.
Well, thanks, Dean. It's an honor to have the opportunity to speak to an international audience. And it's something that I've always found frustrating about politics in the United States and the conversation. And you know, as a libertarian, the limitations imposed, not even by technology and not even by government necessarily, but by the government culture of nationalism, of seeing that there's a conversation among Americans that ends at the borders. And I've always thought it was so important in understanding libertarianism to understand the universality of it, how, you know, it's ethics applied to politics. It's not an American thing. It's definitely not a Canadian thing. It might be a little more a Mexican thing. And certainly now I would think Australia is not doing so well with this thing, but certainly it's a human thing to want to be free, to have your will respected, and to seek justice and to create a better world where ethics matters and individual rights matters, and that we don't institutionalize humanity's worst instincts and evil inclinations into government. So every chance I get, I mean, it's fun. I almost would rather like interview you. Oh, so how's Australia doing with this whole coronaphobia thing these days? Because man, I hear some horror stories, and coming from the land of former convicts and supposed rebels, I think, you know, Australia has gone pretty disappointingly down the statist rabbit hole recently, especially with this whole corona excuse.
Mate, I'm happy to talk to you about that sort of stuff all day. So Dia, who you met before, my editor, she's actually from the socialist state of Victoria, which they're by far the worst of the whole lot. You know, they're pretty close to a communist country down there. And before the last lot of major border shutdowns and lockdowns and things, she just sort of said, "Can I come up and stay this way? You know, you're located somewhere a little less totalitarian at the moment." So yeah, Australia, mate, it's a bit of a disaster at the moment. I'm fairly embarrassed on an awful lot of levels about the state of, you know, we in a lot of ways copy you guys in many areas, and it's this stuff's currently really embarrassing. So what do you do, mate?
Normally, as a libertarian, it's more embarrassing to be an American, and it's you know, one of the things that I go back on that I think is so important. You know, there are a lot of like baby libertarians or people who are just starting on their path of freedom. And when I was on that level, I was running for Congress and as a Republican endorsed by Ron Paul. And I used to carry around in my back pocket a copy of the American Constitution. And a lot of Americans fetishize this document, and they do so out of a desire to seek more freedom in what America is about, not realizing that the Constitution is the exact opposite of that, because it's authorizing that authority that tramples our freedom, but it's not even historically accurate. And now I look back at myself going, oh my gosh, what a douche nozzle. Because I was the guy carrying this Constitution around going, the government, it lies and it kills and it cheats and it steals and it doesn't even follow its own rules. Well, no shit, you know, and it really comes as no surprise when you look at the history, you peel back layers and you go, wow, Yeah, all that stuff I've been spouting about the Constitution was nonsense too, because historically the U.S. Constitution was a coup or part of a coup against the lawful Constitution of the time, the Articles of Confederation. And people say, I mean, even heard Rand Paul on Twitter the other day for Constitution Week saying the Constitution was written. This isn't, I'm not trying to do a Rand Paul impersonation. That would be embarrassing. The Constitution was not written to restrain individuals. It was written to restrain government. And it's like, no, it wasn't. It gave government all these powers in the first place that it's abusing. And if you just, it's just, that's so historically ignorant. And I'm embarrassed to say that this is something, you know, I only figured out fully in the last couple of years, but it just shows how deep this and insidious this propaganda is in the United States that fetishizes the Constitution for conservatives and some libertarians who believe this mythology. But even by the statist mythology, well, why was the Constitution necessary under the Articles? There wasn't a strong enough central authority to tax people and have a standing army. Well, yeah, that was a good thing. That was the point, right? Like, hello.
They're positives. Yeah. They're big positives.
Yeah.
For sure. I actually watched one of your videos because, you know, like I've done quite a few of these now. We had 20 guests on the first series. So we did 10 episodes, you know, of mixed things, about an hour and a half worked out to be, and there was sort of 20 guests. So, you know, I like to check out everyone's stuff, and I sort of go on a bit of a binge beforehand. I actually watched one of your videos talking to a young conservative bloke where you essentially, by the end of his arguments, he really sounded like a raging lefty. It was hilarious to watch because you didn't actually make him do anything other than ask the right questions, which is, from what I've seen, is one of your superpowers, is to be able to actually get them to almost advertise themselves as status when they're saying, I'm for small government. It was really well done. It was very clever.
Thank you. You know, I'm somewhat notorious for my man on the street videos where I do a kind of Socratic dialogue stick mic interview. And to your point, you know, I made him sound like a liberal? No, I just exposed that in American political culture, this idea, I mean, first of all, if I may, like, I feel like you got to step back anytime you're talking about political ideology and terminology, because if you don't define terms, you know, people talk past each other. And that's a big part of what I do in these man on the street interviews, is just ask people to explain what they mean and ask those prying questions. And if you define fascism, socialism, or communism in any kind of honest way, you have to realize that it applies to the U.S. government. Now, fascism might be the extreme one of those, and if it doesn't have, like, you know, a unified, you know, racist or nationalist ideology, you know, maybe it's not. But Mussolini defined fascism as the merging of corporations and state. He said it should be better described as corporatism. Well, we have that in the United States. You know, you look at communism, there are 10 planks in the Communist Manifesto written by Karl Marx. Guess what? We have all of them, at least partially, if not fully, in effect in the United States. Socialism, communal ownership of an economic or political system based on communal ownership. How socialist is America? Let me count the ways. We have socialized retirement. We even call it Social Security, socialized public safety, defense, Medicare, Medicaid. You have infrastructure, so many functions in regulation that end up, and we have socialized money. You know, we have a fiat currency, and maybe socialized isn't the best way to describe a corporate, private fiat currency that's forced on people in order to rip us off. But it's certainly not free market money. And none of the people who call themselves conservatives in mainstream American politics are actually changing the fundamental fascist, communist, socialist nature of Americans, the American government. They're just trying to put their own little spin on it, their own little flavor. And even by the definition of the word conservative, it means in the political context to conserve existing social institutions, someone who wants to preserve the status quo. Well, if the status quo is communist and you call yourself a conservative, hello, you're a communist. And it's not hard to reveal this talking to the individuals who say, well, I want government to do X. Well, anything that you say like, well, I'm okay with using the force and violence of government to do X, you're socializing something, or at very least you're violating people's rights. And to me, this is the most important part of libertarianism, is that ethical core that really shows libertarianism is not a political philosophy. It's ethics applied to politics. And it's really simple, the non-aggression principle. Don't hit, don't steal, don't kill, not unless you're, a cop, a soldier, or an IRS agent. Those are universal ethical principles. And anytime you violate those, you take humanity away from our potential to live in a cooperative world of nothing but voluntary relationships that are win-win, where there's no win-lose relationships. And that's, what some people would describe as the ideal of capitalism. And in order for that to really make sense, you have to, again, define terms properly. And in capitalism, like whether the wording itself or the term itself, obviously so maligned and misused, but means an economic system based on ownership of the means of production. Well, if you let them convince you that the only valuable means of production are factories and big companies and things like that, as opposed to the truth, which is that you, the individual will, mind, spirit, creative energy, you are the ultimate means of production. And if you don't own yourself, you don't have capitalism. If someone is claiming ownership over you, you have some form of I hesitate to call it slavery, because people think of slavery as like complete ownership, but how is it any different if we have a lesser form of slavery where you don't own yourself in practice, at least to the extent that it can get away with the support of the public? Government claims ownership over you.
Yeah. Like, man, look, you're spot on in the no harm principle. I've summarized it onto a T-shirt. One of my little T-shirts I've just had printed or getting printed off do no harm, but take no shit. That's kind of the little philosophy that I've been running with. And we've been doing little videos, we're starting to grow gardens on the property here, and, all the self-sufficiency stuff, and really separate out. And that's why we've included Bitcoin in the program. And this is sort of designed to be a bit of an all-encompassing freedom program where people can, learn different little bits and pieces, even for people who aren't as far along as yourself. Okay, you want to learn how to do gardening. That's something you can do for your own liberation. What have you? Oh, look at this. How good's this?
Well, this is my epic Arizona sunset tonight here in Gardenia at the Garden of Freedom at my homestead. And we've got some geodesic domes. That one's going to be a greenhouse. That's already a garden planter area. And this big one here is going to be a house in a couple of months.
Yeah, right. That's really cool. Really cool.
And this, I hope you can see this on the screen there. If you see this tree, you can see what happened. This is one of my survivor trees. You can see here, it got knocked over.
Yep.
And just decided to keep growing sideways. And I have a lot of these here, my survivor trees, these junipers. And when you see a tree like that got knocked completely sideways and said, well, you know what? I got roots in the ground. I'm just going to keep growing and doing it. It's pretty hard to walk out your door in the morning, see that, and have a bad day.
Nature finds a way, mate. Nature finds a way. It's only humans that have managed to complicate all this sort of stuff, isn't it? It's unbelievable. Mate, so I guess there's a couple of topics I definitely want to get your opinion on while I've got you, because I think that'd be I'd be foolish not to harass you for these things.
Well,
so
you know what they say about opinions.
Oh yeah, like assholes. Everybody's got one. Don't worry about language either on this. We're free speech all the way here. I don't care about monetization on the program. Adam versus the man, mate. You've been kicking goals with that for quite a while now. What was your original motivation? Was it I just felt like making myself famous, Adam Kokesh, or you were just really trying to drive the message?
Well, if I wanted to be famous, I wouldn't be doing this. That's for certain. This is not a good way to get famous. Challenging authority is a better way to get shadow banned and censored than famous, because and man, that says a lot, because you look at who's famous and you stop and think, like, what agendas are they supporting? And it's pretty disturbing. But for me, it was coming back. I mean, the motivation for me is as an activist first and foremost. And I define an activist as somebody who's motivated by a deep-seated sense of injustice. Like, you see something wrong in the world, someone being victimized, and you want to do something about it. And for me, I mean, I've always had that attitude. You know, even in the Marines, you know, there's a mentality of teamwork and just showing initiative to help people. And as a, you know, a leader, you know, every Marine's a leader, you know, that kind of thing. But it really is true in teaching you to be proactive and engaged. The thing, and I was a libertarian, like in name only, without really understanding what it meant when I joined the Marines and when I volunteered to go to Iraq. So I can't say that I had that deeper understanding at this point, but it was when I got back from Iraq and I realized that I had seen my buddies die for lies. I had witnessed the evil of government firsthand. I had seen the worst that government is capable of leading other human beings to do. And if I may, this is a bit personal, but I tortured people one night when I was there during the siege of Fallujah, and I was asked to guard detainees and continue their sleep deprivation that they were being subjected to. And I went to Iraq with the intention of helping people and being in civil affairs. You know, I wanted to do right by the Iraqi people and help clean up the mess of the invasion. So to be led to that and to look back, it was really disturbing. But even simpler than that, you know, less personal, to come back from Iraq and realize that the people I served alongside, who I saw die there, died for lies. Man, that's pretty fucking motivating, you know. And a lot of vets take that as motivation for despair, and that's why one of the reasons you have 22 veteran suicides a day in the United States. And that's something. I mean, it's one of the, you want to talk about, you know, what makes it embarrassing to be an American. We both smoke up the troops' butts constantly, but when it comes to 22 veteran suicides a day, you know, we don't want to pay attention to that. So, you know, push that under the rug. So I came back and I got involved with Iraq Veterans Against the War because I saw this immediate injustice that I had been a part of, that I could speak to in a way that could lessen the suffering. And I got to say, man, it's a really mind-boggling experience to come home from a war zone and to know that there are people still dying back there, and that it's happening because the American people don't know what's going on. And I do, from my experience, and I could get them to listen and say, no, we need to stop this. This is nonsense. People are dying for no good reason. You know, you have to be able to have the humanity to recognize that injustice, and it's motivating. So that really was what more than anything propelled me into full-time activism. And I think for a lot of activists, you know, there are people who work on victims of family law who have had their children taken from them by government. There are people who work on the drug war because they've had their own lives ruined by drug arrests. I think that this is, you know, one of the most beautiful things in this period of human history, that there's so many people able to take the injustices that they were subjected to or victimized with or a part of, as I was, and a victim in some ways, and to say, I'm going to dedicate my life to making sure nobody else has to suffer this way. So with Iraq Veterans Against the War, it was really about getting that message out and wanting the American people to know the truth about what was going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. Since then, you know, I've come to realize it's not enough to be against one war. In the global war of terror, you have to see this whole policy is fucked. You know, and I can tell you from my experience, it was designed to create enemies faster than we could kill them. It was designed not to be won, but to be perpetuated, obviously. So you go, well, it's not enough to be against this policy. You got to be against militarism. And you go, well, it's not even militarism. Militarism is almost a symptom of statism, of turning to organized, coercive, unethical authority to solve social problems for which there's no excuse, because the non-aggression principle, basic libertarian ethics and basic human ethics is, the only time it's okay to use violence against someone is to prevent, when they're a threat to someone else, to prevent greater harm or to defend yourself. But to point a gun to someone's head and say, well, you have to give me these resources or this much of your income so that I can reorganize society to fit my vision. No, that's not an excuse. And if you give into that, you end up with what you have today. So in terms of Adam versus the Man, it was actually born when I was running for Congress in New Mexico in 2010, and I couldn't shut up when the race was over, so I got a radio show.
What's wrong? What are you crying about? There's no need to cry. There's no need to be sad. Just subscribe and tune in to our channel next week.